under state law, who can register a weapon?
Under state law, register a handgun?
Yes.
Okay. So under state law, you can register a handgun at 18 years old, but obviously you can't buy one until you're 21 from a federal firearms licensee. So you can, in one way, buy a private sale from someone that's 18 to someone that's over 18, and then register that firearm. So I have seen through previous experience that you could register a weapon at 18, a handgun, but you could not purchase that handgun from a federally licensed gun store, if that makes sense.
Okay. Were you made aware at some point if James Crumbley owned any other weapons other than the weapon he purchased on November 26th?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the reference of a weapon. I think it's a vague question. I think what Agent Brandon is aware of is alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives. I think that the classification of a weapon is vague. If the prosecution is asking about firearms or handguns or pistols, then I think that should be the question and not specifically a weapon.
Well, this response could clarify that.
Correct, Your Honor.
Right? So go ahead.
You were made aware what other the reason I'm using weapon is because I don't want to specify because that'd be leading, so I'm trying to get him to explain it without asking a leading question. You were made aware what did he also own or purchase, if you know?
So in June of that year, he had also purchased a Cobra Classic Derringer and also a Kel-Tec P17 .22 caliber pistol from that same gun store in Oxford.
So that was about 5 months earlier?
Yes.
Okay. Were both of those guns bought at the same time?
They were bought within several days of each other, but they were not bought at the same time.
And how did the gun store have any record of those sales?
Yes.
What was it?
So they had the 4473 documenting the sale of the Derringer, as well as a sales receipt and a Michigan pistol sales record documenting the sale to Mr. Crumbly for both the Derringer and the Kel-Tec pistol.
Okay. So you've indicated now 3 separate handguns. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I am going to start asking you about each of these handguns and describe the difference in each. I'm putting on gloves because this is evidence, and I want to touch it with my gloves on. And the first handgun I'm going to ask you about is the handgun purchased on November 26th. Do you know what type of handgun it was?
Yes.
What was it?
It was a 6-hour SP 2022 with a specified serial number.
And so was it a 9mm?
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. So before I do that, Special Agent Brandon, what is the way to handle a handgun safely before you even pick it up? I know there are firearm safety guidelines, but how do you make sure when you're handling a weapon for the first time that you're doing so in a safe way before?
Object to relevance, Your Honor.
Response?
I think the element of the crime that the defendant is charged with goes back to a legal duty in handling and storing a firearm, and so I absolutely think it's relevant.
Okay, do you mean picking it up or?
In every way.
Okay. I'm real out.
Thank you. How do you safely pick up a handgun?
Sure. So based on the fact, so there is a zip tie in it, so everyone is aware that firearm has been made safe already, but for the purposes of this, so if you pick up the firearm, you want to keep it pointed in a safe direction, you want to keep your finger off the trigger, and you want to visually and physically inspect the chamber of the weapon and the magazine well of the weapon to make sure that it's not loaded.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up this. We know that is this the murder weapon?
Yes, it is.
All right. And we know that this has a zip tie in it.
Correct.
Okay.
Can you specify what exhibit number that is?
Yes, I'm sorry. 163. I think it's either admitted or there's no objection to it.
Correct.
Okay. This is the murder weapon. There's a zip tie in it. But even if there isn't, the general principle is to make sure the firearm is safe you just said you physically examined the magazine well. Is that this right here?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then you also have to do a second step, did you say?
Yeah, so the same thing. So I would say physically and visually inspect the chamber of the weapon. So down the barrel, if you look down the barrel right
So
there.
right
yeah,
here?
and to make sure there's not a round inserted into the chamber of the firearm.
Okay. And again, there's a zip tie in here, but in order to comply with that, you'd have to physically inspect to make sure there's no round in this chamber.
Correct.
And why? What's the reason for that?
So with firearm, there's 4 basic principles of firearm safety. I mentioned 2 of them. Number 1 is to treat every firearm like it's loaded. Number 2 is to point the firearm in a safe direction. 3 would be keep your finger off the trigger, and then obviously not for report purposes, but if you're at a range or shooting, is to be mindful of your target and what's beyond it. At least that's the way ATF trains the 4 pillars of firearm safety. So the purpose would be to make sure that firearm's not loaded, that in case the trigger was accidentally or unintentionally discharged, that there's not an actual round in the chamber to be discharged.
Is it possible for a firearm to discharge without touching the actual trigger?
That would depend on a lot of different factors, including the type of firearm.
Okay.
I probably can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that you have to identify certain markings. Where are, and I'm going to give you some gloves if you don't mind. We practice with the gloves, so it doesn't take this long, but it's still. Okay, if you wouldn't mind standing if that's okay with the judge.
Okay.
I'm going to hand this handgun to you, safely pointed down, so you can show the jury what markings you're talking about to identify the weapon.
So as you can see right here, it's kind of hard to see with the light, but it says Sig Sauer. That would be the manufacturer. And then you have the serial number as well as the caliber is generally also stamped on there as well.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to put this safely back into its box. And then do you know what these are?
Yes, those are the pistol magazines that come with the Sig Sauer SP 2022.
Okay. And just in case there are people on the jury that don't have a familiarity with handguns, what are these for? What's inside here usually?
So in a semi-automatic pistol, you would load your ammunition. Those magazines, I believe, can take up to 15 rounds. So you'd load the 9mm ammunition to capacity to 15 rounds and then insert that into the firearm. And then once you send the slide forward, that is what allows the round to be chambered into the firearm to be ready to be discharged.
So it has a 15-round capacity.
So it would have a 15-round magazine capacity. You can also fit 1 round in the chamber. So that firearm has a total capacity of 16 rounds.
Before you would have to reload.
Yes.
Okay. So can you explain to the jury what semi-automatic means?
So a semi-automatic firearm means that for every pull of the trigger, it only fires 1 projectile from the firearm, as opposed to a automatic firearm, which would be that if you pull the trigger 1 time, multiple rounds are dispelled from the firearm with 1 pull of the trigger.
The other 2 weapons you stated were a Derringer and a .22, correct?
It was a .22 caliber Derringer and a .22 caliber Cobra Classic, or a .22 caliber Kel-Tec pistol.
Okay, so Kel-Tec. All right. What is the difference between those 2 guns and a 9mm?
So a Kel-Tec, the Kel-Tec pistol is also a semi-automatic pistol. It's just chambered in .22 caliber as opposed to 9mm. It's a smaller round, and the Derringer.
And again, you say round, and I think for lay people they think of that as many. But what do you mean when you say round?
So I know that there's been some talk in this trial about bullets. Bullets are the part of the piece of ammunition that comes out of the firearm when it's shot. The round of ammunition is what's inserted into the magazine before it's fired. That has the fired cartridge case, the bullet itself, and then some type of propellant or powder, usually smokeless powder.